Beneath the cobbled streets of Paris, past the perfume of fresh bread and fear, one woman held the names of traitors, killers, and ghosts. Her bookstore was a mask. Her ledger was a weapon. And what she wrote in invisible ink could have changed the course of the war, if it hadn't almost killed her first. Open the pages of a secret too dangerous to tell, and too haunting to forget. The wind screamed across the frozen expanse like a banshee in mourning. Snowflakes, sharp as razors, cut across the cheeks of Captain Elsa Hartmann as she stepped from the canvas-covered truck into the endless white of the Norwegian Arctic. The year was 1942, and the war was raging far to the south, but here, on the edge of the world, a different kind of battle was unfolding. One where silence was survival and a single flare of light could mean annihilation. Hartmann, once a Berlin socialite fluent in 5 languages, had defected to Britain in 1937 after seeing the rise of fascism devour her homeland. Recruited by the Special Operations Executive, SOE, she quickly became one of its most valuable field agents. She wasn't just a spy. She was a ghost. A myth whispered among Nazi officers in darkened bunkers. Now, she was leading Task Force Polaris, a classified unit comprising British commandos, Norwegian guides, and one Russian defector, into the heart of an Arctic storm to sabotage Nazi Germany's most secret weapon, the Aurora Array. The Germans had constructed a weather station and radar facility deep within the Svalbard archipelago. Intelligence from intercepted Enigma transmissions suggested it was part of a larger system meant to disrupt Allied convoys navigating the treacherous North Atlantic. The station didn't just predict weather patterns, it altered them. Using experimental ionospheric manipulation and high-altitude chemical releases, the Nazis aimed to create artificial fog banks to conceal U-boat movements and freeze British supply routes. The plan to stop them was code-named Operation Silent Storm. It involved an overland approach from the coast, traveling under the cover of polar night, across glaciers riddled with crevasses and Nazi patrols. Their equipment was minimal: skis, sleds, and silence. The operation demanded no gunfire unless absolutely necessary. The frigid landscape would do the killing for them. Sergeant Colin Reed, a Royal Marine with a face carved from granite, passed Hartmann a steaming tin of black coffee as the unit gathered by a half-buried rock outcrop. 10 clicks north-northeast. Our Norwegian friend says there's a hidden crevasse field near the ridge. We move fast and light, he said, pointing to the map illuminated by a red-filtered torch. Leif Anderson, a Sami tracker with ice-blue eyes, gave a slight nod. The winds shift after midnight. If we're caught on the ridge, we're exposed. They moved like shadows, skiing across powdery snow with silent precision. Overhead, the aurora danced green and violet, a surreal canopy over their deadly path. In the darkness, every breath felt too loud. Every crack of ice underfoot was a prayer unanswered. 3 days into the trek, they found the first sign of the German presence: a crashed weather balloon, its equipment shattered but its casing still warm. Hartmann knelt beside it, brushing snow from the metal. This isn't just weather tech. Look at these filaments, radioactive tracers. Her voice was barely a whisper. They're experimenting with atmosphere-based interference. Reed narrowed his eyes. How many people know about this? None. And it stays that way. On the 4th night, as they approached the ridge overlooking the station, the sky cleared for the first time. Through binoculars, Hartmann saw the facility, a sprawl of Quonset huts, radio towers, and a central dome emitting a low, pulsating hum. Searchlights swept across the snow like the eyes of sleeping giants. The team hunkered down and waited for the signal, a brief blackout of the aurora's glow, a phenomenon triggered remotely from a modified Enigma rig carried by their radio operator, Vasily Markov. Markov, a former Red Army engineer who'd fled Stalin's purges, tapped furiously at the keys. The signal pulsed. Above, the aurora flickered and died. The German garrison panicked. Lights went dark. Confusion rippled through the camp. That was the window. They moved fast. 2 commandos disabled the outer perimeter mines. Anderson silently slit the throat of a sentry patrolling the dome's entrance. Hartmann and Reed breached the dome, encountering a scientist frantically adjusting dials on a massive control panel shaped like a ribcage of steel and glass. "Don't touch it," the scientist barked in German, before seeing Hartmann's face. "Elsa." It was Dr. Dietrich Kleist, her former university professor. The man who once told her that ethics had no place in technological progress. Now, he stood trembling, his hands raised. "This machine will not just mask ships, it can blind entire radar grids for hundreds of miles," he said. "But it's unstable. If you destroy it." Reed didn't wait. He planted charges at the base of the panel while Hartmann locked eyes with Kleist. "You were wrong, Professor," she said. "Ethics are all we have left." They pulled back as sirens wailed and the first shots rang out. A bullet grazed Anderson's shoulder. Markov returned fire with a suppressed rifle, dropping 2 soldiers. They raced across the snowfield, the dome behind them now glowing an unnatural blue. The explosion was unlike anything they'd anticipated. The sky ripped open in a blinding flash. For a moment, it seemed like dawn had come early. A wave of heat followed by an electromagnetic pulse knocked them off their feet. Radios went dead. Compasses spun. The aurora flared in reds and oranges, a solar storm birthed by man. They made it to the extraction point 2 days later, frostbitten and exhausted. Anderson's wound had festered, and Markov had gone half-deaf from the blast. Hartmann sat in the belly of the extraction plane, staring out at the endless white, clutching a piece of the destroyed array, a crystal filament etched with Nazi runes. Task Force Polaris was never mentioned in public records. The operation was buried under layers of classified reports, redacted documents, and deliberate misinformation. But Allied convoys found safe passage again. The fog banks dispersed. And the Nazis never rebuilt the Aurora array. Years later, a British historian would stumble across a torn page in a war diary. 6 names, a map of the Arctic, and the words, "We silenced the storm, but it still haunts the skies." Elsa Hartmann disappeared after the war, last seen boarding a freighter bound for Reykjavik. Some say she lived the rest of her life in solitude, watching the aurora with wary eyes, waiting for the storm to return. At dawn, the streets of Lyon looked like any other city under occupation, quiet, tense, and drained of color. The Nazi flags draped from stone facades flapped lazily in the wind, and jackboots echoed off cobblestones with a rhythm that no longer startled anyone. But underneath that silence, the city breathed defiance. In hidden cellars and behind thick velvet curtains, a secret war was raging, led not by soldiers or spies, but by women who had lost everything. They were called the Widows' Brigade. Their leader, Madeleine Chevalier, had once commanded ovations at the Opera Garnier. A soprano of great renown, she had performed for kings and diplomats. Her voice had filled grand halls from Paris to Vienna. But after her husband, Jacques, a schoolteacher and member of the early resistance, was executed by the Gestapo in 1941, the music stopped. For a week, she disappeared from public life. When she returned, she was changed. Her gaze, once soft with kindness, had turned to steel. She formed the brigade from the ashes of grief, gathering women who had lost husbands, sons, and fathers to the occupation. Most were ordinary, bakers, seamstresses, nurses, but war had carved out a void in them that only action could fill. Their first meeting took place in the catacombs beneath Lyon, candles flickering against damp stone walls as Madeleine unrolled a stolen Vichy blueprint of Gestapo headquarters. "No more mourning," she said, her voice low and unwavering. "If we cannot bring them back, we will make them proud." Their first mission was modest. Smuggle a British airman out of the city. The airman had crashed near Grenoble and had been hidden by local farmers, but the Gestapo was closing in. The brigade coordinated with the local SOE liaison and devised a plan: disguise him as a funeral procession's priest. The widow Jean Rousseau lent her husband's old cassock. Helene Fournier, who had lost both her son and her right thumb in a bombing, drove the hearse. They passed through 2 checkpoints without incident. The young pilot reached Spain weeks later, and his message was the first proof London had that the Widows' Brigade existed. Word spread quickly among the underground. Women who had been dismissed as weak or broken suddenly became the most dangerous force in Lyon. Their anonymity was their greatest strength. The Nazis never suspected the grieving widow serving them bread or tending to their wounded could also be the architect of the next assassination. Their second major operation targeted SS Obersturmbannführer Klaus Richter, known for his brutal purges of Jewish families and partisan sympathizers. He made a habit of dining at the Café Étoile every Thursday night. Madeleine herself posed as the lounge singer, returning briefly to her role as a performer. Her voice, ghost-like and mournful, brought tears to the eyes of German officers. As she sang, Denise Laval, whose fiancé had vanished in Drancy, slipped into the kitchen and poisoned Richter's wine. He died before dessert. The brigade left behind no trace except for a single red lily on the piano. But victory bred danger. The Gestapo noticed the pattern: assassinations, sabotage, disappearances, all somehow linked to women once thought harmless. They dubbed the mysterious cell Les Veuves Noires, the Black Widows, and launched a crackdown. Curfews were enforced. Random raids increased. Women were questioned, tortured, hanged in public squares as warnings. But still, the brigade endured. They used coded advertisements in the newspaper to communicate. A listing for black lace gloves meant an arms drop was scheduled. A notice for sheet music restoration indicated a planned sabotage on a train line. One of their couriers, young Emily Dufresne, hid microfilm inside her braids, which she kept wound tight in traditional Provençal fashion. The turning point came in the winter of 1943. The Allies were preparing for Operation Dragoon, the invasion of southern France, and needed the railway lines disrupted before the landings. WWII agents contacted the brigade with a request: destroy the signal hub at La Muletière without alerting German reinforcements in Lyon. It was suicide. The hub was heavily guarded, with patrols every hour and machine gun nests on the hills above. But Madeleine knew it had to be done. The women divided into 3 groups. One would create a distraction, setting fire to a munitions cache in a nearby barracks. Another would intercept German reinforcements with a fake roadblock, using stolen uniforms and forged papers. The last, led by Madeleine herself, would plant the explosives. They moved under cover of darkness. Fire bloomed on the horizon as the distraction began. German vehicles rerouted toward the smoke. At precisely 2:11 a.m., the explosives beneath the signal hub were detonated. The sky lit up like lightning had torn through the city. Trains stopped. Lines went dark. Days later, American forces landed at Saint-Tropez with minimal resistance. But the cost was heavy. 3 members were captured during the roadblock. Denise Laval among them. She refused to speak, even as Richter's successor tore out her fingernails one by one. Madeleine, watching through binoculars from the hills, did not look away. After the war, she would say that moment taught her what true courage looked like. In the final months of the occupation, the brigade shifted to evacuating Jewish children across the Swiss border. They created false identities, bribed guards, and walked by moonlight through the Jura forests. Hélène Fournier, who could no longer hold a rifle due to her injuries, became the mother to dozens of these children, guiding them in silence with only the rustle of pine needles to comfort them. When Lyon was liberated in September 1944, the Widows' Brigade vanished. No victory parade, no medals. Most returned to their quiet lives, never speaking of what they had done. Madeleine Chevalier declined an invitation to sing at the celebration, saying only, "My voice belongs to the dead now." Years later, a journalist found a rusted box buried beneath a cellar in Croix-Rousse. Inside were photographs, maps, a revolver wrapped in silk, and a note in elegant handwriting. "We were not heroes. We were hearts set on fire. If we are remembered, let it be as women who turned grief into justice." Today, in a small corner of the Musée de la Résistance in Lyon, there is a plaque that reads, "A celles que ont pleuré en silence, pousse frappé dans l'ombre," to those who wept in silence, then struck from the shadows. By early 1944, Warsaw was a city strangled by occupation and haunted by the constant hum of despair. The ghetto had already burned, The resistance had been shattered and rebuilt in secret, and the people moved like ghosts through streets renamed by their oppressors. But beneath the cracked plaster and faded posters, something endured, a voice. A signal. A spark of hope buried in static. They called it Echo WWII, the Echo of Warsaw. It was not an official resistance group, nor was it supported by the British or Soviets. It was a pirate radio station, operated from the bombed-out shell of an abandoned theater, powered by stolen Wehrmacht batteries and a transmitter cobbled together from church bells and black market vacuum tubes. No one knew who ran it. The Germans believed it was Soviet propaganda. The Soviets assumed it was British. But to the people of Warsaw, it was something holier than either. It was their own voice. The broadcasts began after the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising was crushed in May 1943. Once a week at midnight, the frequency would crackle to life, transmitting only for 6 minutes. The voice was calm, accented with the rhythm of an educated Warsawite. It shared coded messages, news from the outside, and once, a poem. Asterisk, we are not the ash you sweep from your streets. We are the ember that waits beneath. Asterisk. Behind the voice was Janusz Zielinski, a failed stage actor turned electrician whose wife and daughter had died during the bombing of Praga. After losing his family, Janusz had wandered the city for days, finally breaking into the burned ruins of the Grand Lumiere Theater, where he had once worked the lights. In its basement, he found the shattered remains of a Soviet radio set left behind in the chaos of 1939. Over the next few months, he rebuilt it with trembling hands and dogged obsession. And then, one night, he spoke into the world. He was joined by Irina Nowak, a former librarian and quiet genius who had memorized entire passages of censored books. She wrote the scripts, gathered intelligence from Polish Home Army contacts, and helped calibrate the signal to avoid Nazi detection. Together, they crafted each message with surgical precision. But time was against them. The Germans had detected the signal twice already, and triangulation teams were combing the city during each broadcast. Anyone found with a radio tuned to the wrong frequency risked execution. Still, the people listened. Old men huddled in basements. Children stayed awake, eyes wide, as static turned to speech. And when the echo spoke, for those 6 minutes, Warsaw lived again. In January 1944, word reached the station that the Home Army was planning a full-scale uprising in coordination with the Soviet advance. The echo needed to prepare the population without alerting the Germans. Irina crafted a message in layers, public code words embedded in a fictional tale. She wrote a short play, reminiscent of a Polish folktale, about a phoenix who must wait until the stars align to rise from ash. Each stanza referred to a day, a street, a signal. The final line was unmistakable. Asterisk, and when the third bell tolls, strike, not for revenge, but for return. Asterisk. It was the boldest message they had ever aired. But the Germans were listening too. The following night, a patrol raided the building next door. Janusz watched through a cracked wall as they dragged out a tailor and his son, shooting them both. It had been a false lead. But it was a message. Irina wanted to halt the broadcasts. Let the people act in their own time, she pleaded. But Janusz was resolute. If we go silent, the city goes with us. They decided on one final broadcast, July 31, 1944. The night before the uprising. The script was short. No riddles. No metaphors. Just truth. To the soldiers of the Home Army, to the mothers, to the boys who still carry books, to the girls who pass notes and dream of light. We see you. We believe in you. Tomorrow is not the end. It is the return. Let them come. We are the ones who stayed. As the hour neared, Irina adjusted the tuning dials while Janusz cleared his throat. A distant whistle signaled the German patrol's approach. They had 15 minutes, maybe less. He leaned into the microphone. The red light blinked. And then, silence. The broadcast never went live. The transmitter had burned out. A single wire had snapped, corroded by damp and time. Irina fell to her knees, trying to repair it, while Janusz lit a cigarette with shaking fingers. They had no tools. No time. He looked at her and said, "Then let's make them hear us another way." That night, Janusz climbed to the top of the ruined theater with a flare gun left behind by a dead German soldier. At 12:06 a.m., a red flare arced over the city. Then another. Then a third. 3 bells. 3 signals. Just as the message had said. All across Warsaw, people turned to the sky. They understood. When dawn broke, church bells rang for the first time in years. Doors opened. Molotovs were handed to boys in school uniforms. Men with carpenters' hands held rifles with the ease of memory. The Warsaw Uprising had begun. Janusz was killed 2 days later in a crossfire near Plak-Teatralny. Irina survived the siege, smuggled out through the sewers with the help of a Catholic nun and a child she claimed as her own. After the war, Irina emigrated to Canada. She never spoke of the Echo again. But in 1968, on the anniversary of the uprising, a Montreal radio station received an unmarked reel-to-reel tape. It contained a single 6-minute recording. The voice was cracked with age, but unmistakable. "You are not forgotten. You are not alone. And the ember still burns." To this day, amateur radio enthusiasts in Poland report hearing fragments of Echo Warsaw on stormy nights, as if the ruins of the city still remember that voice, and refuse to let it fade. In the frozen cradle of the Austrian Alps, where avalanches bury all and the sky hangs heavy with silence, there once existed a fortress that no map dared to show. Built into the glacial rock near the summit of Hochkönig, this compound, code-named Einest, or Ice Nest, was one of Nazi Germany's most secretive and ambitious strongholds. Rumors of its existence swirled through Allied intelligence circles, whispered in intercepted messages and muttered by defectors. But the truth would not be confirmed until decades later, when the ice began to melt. In the final months of World War II, as the Third Reich buckled under the weight of Allied advances, SS Obergruppenführer Gerhard Falkenrath initiated Operation Nachtglas, a last-ditch project to safeguard the Reich's most classified research, ledgers, and blueprints. Falkenrath was no ordinary officer. Once a respected glaciologist, he had been radicalized early and became obsessed with the idea that the mountains could outlast the war and preserve its secrets indefinitely. Construction on Einest began in 1943. Using prisoners from nearby camps and forced laborers brought in under cover of night, a cavernous network of tunnels and vaults was bored into the glacier itself. At its core lay a reinforced concrete archive chamber buried over 100 meters beneath the ice, temperature-controlled and sealed with a complex air filtration system. Supplies were lowered via camouflaged elevators hidden within rock faces, accessible only by narrow goat trails and coded knock sequences. The team was small and deadly efficient. Engineers, archivists, cryptographers, and guards handpicked from the SS' most loyal divisions. The mission was simple: preserve the Reich's inner circle documentation, research from the Ahnenerbe, nuclear experiments, diplomatic blackmail files, and a catalogue of priceless art looted from across Europe. Among them was Emil Kessler, a young cryptographer barely 22, who had been conscripted after his brilliance with ciphers was discovered by the Gestapo. Kessler, naive and politically indifferent, believed he was serving his country by protecting information. But as he saw what was being stored, records from Dachau, photos of massacres, scientific reports on human experimentation, his illusions shattered. He began to copy documents in secret. Using a typewriter he had smuggled into a disused ventilation room, he retyped the most damning files and sealed them inside waterproof containers made from supply tins. His hope was to leave a trail, something that would survive the ice and be found by someone, someday. Then came the order to destroy the vault. On April 28, 1945, with Berlin falling and Allied forces moving through Bavaria, Falkenrath issued his final command. The entire Einest archive was to be buried. Dynamite was rigged, the entrances rigged to collapse, and the guards were given cyanide capsules to avoid capture. Falkenrath, ever the romantic, believed the ice would seal the fortress like a time capsule, keeping the Reich's legacy alive until a new order emerged. Kessler made his move. While others prepared for the end, he slipped into the archive chamber and sabotaged the charges. He couldn't prevent the collapse entirely, but he redirected the explosives to bury the vault entrance while keeping the core intact. As the mountain roared and rock crumbled, he hid in a maintenance shaft, surviving on emergency rations for 3 days. When he emerged, the fortress was sealed, the glacier had shifted, and all signs of Einst were erased by nature. Kessler surrendered to the Americans on May 3, claiming to be a defector with knowledge of Nazi vaults. But his story was too wild, too conveniently unverifiable. He was detained for months, interrogated, then released with no charges. No one ever found Einst. No official records matched his claims. He vanished into obscurity, living out his days in a Bavarian village as a quiet piano teacher. It wasn't until the summer of 1992 that the first clue emerged. An extreme heat wave swept across the Alps, causing glaciers to recede at alarming rates. Hikers reported odd debris, rusted metal, fragments of paper, a steel case emblazoned with a faded eagle and swastika. A Swiss documentary crew followed the story, eventually uncovering a sealed tunnel partially exposed by the melt. Inside were frozen bodies, uniforms still intact, their faces twisted in agony. One still clutched a Luger. Beyond them, embedded in the ice, were crates marked Reichsarchiv. Dozens of them. But the most astonishing find came weeks later, when a sealed tin was discovered, its contents pristine despite decades entombed in permafrost. Inside were photographs, detailed floor plans, and a journal signed by Emil Kessler. One line read, "If this is found, know that I was not complicit. The truth is here. The lies must not survive the ice." What followed was one of the most classified recovery operations in post-Cold War European history. NATO intelligence cordoned off the glacier, citing avalanche risk. 4 months, specialized teams excavated the site, removing vaults under tight security. Few outside the operation know exactly what was recovered. Rumors persist, documents about secret Nazi-Soviet contacts, failed nuclear prototypes, Vatican correspondences, even a full inventory of looted Jewish gold. But the Austrian government maintains a simple line: glacial erosion exposed a forgotten World War II bunker. No further comment. To this day, conspiracy theories abound. Some say the contents of Einst were shared with Mossad in exchange for intelligence favors. Others claim portions were sold to private collectors through anonymous auctions in Luxembourg. A former American intelligence officer who later went rogue stated the vault contained proof the war didn't end the way we think. As for Emil Kessler, his grave in Bad Reichenhall now bears a simple epitaph. Asterisk, he left the truth in the ice. Asterisk. Every spring, as the glaciers groan and retreat, climbers still seek the hidden remnants of Einst. Most return empty-handed. But some claim that, in the heart of the mountain, you can still hear a low hum, metal contracting, systems buried, secrets waiting. Waiting for the next thaw. In the heart of Nazi-occupied Paris, behind a shuttered antique bookstore on Rue de Martyrs, lived an unremarkable woman who went by the name Madame Noël Laurent. Her neighbors knew her as a widow, quiet, pale, fond of dusty books and black coffee, with a kind of stare that seemed to look through people rather than at them. Few knew her past, and none dared ask. But hidden among the yellowed pages of her shop was a leather-bound ledger, its pages laced with invisible ink and secrets that could shatter empires. Noël Laurent was not her real name. She had been born Natalia Kazarina, the daughter of a Russian nobleman exiled after the Bolshevik Revolution. Her family fled to France in 1920, leaving behind land, wealth, and her younger brother, who was taken by the Cheka. Natalia learned young that loyalty could be fatal and that silence was a form of survival. As war crept across Europe, she sharpened her mind and buried her identity. When the Germans marched into Paris in 1940, she was ready. Recruited by the British Special Operations Executive (SOE) in early 1941, Natalia became known to her handlers as Widow, a code name chosen not just for cover, but because death followed her operations like a shroud. She specialized in infiltration, manipulation, and data collection, particularly through relationships with high-ranking Axis collaborators. Her bookstore became the perfect mask, frequented by Wehrmacht officers, Vichy sympathizers, and unwitting couriers, all of whom underestimated the mousy woman who fetched rare volumes with trembling hands. The ledger was her masterpiece. Written in an old accounting book, its visible content listed nothing more than false inventories and bogus invoices. But with heat, water, or carefully applied lemon juice, layers of secret intelligence appeared: troop movements, names of Gestapo agents, maps of German rail lines, and even transcripts of intercepted Nazi conversations recorded using a microphone hidden beneath a chessboard. She recorded every meeting in code, every betrayal in shorthand. Her system was flawless, until one name appeared in her ledger that made her hesitate: Etienne Marchand. Etienne had once been a journalist, a firebrand in the pre-war days who had criticized Hitler in editorials and vanished in 1938. When he reappeared in Paris in 1943 wearing the armband of the milice, the brutal Vichy paramilitary force, Natalia assumed he had been turned or broken in some hellish prison. But then he visited her bookstore. He came for Baudelaire, he said, the edition with the ink that bleeds. She understood the phrase instantly. It was a recognition code used only among the inner ring of the French resistance. But it wasn't just that. The way he moved, the way he scanned the room, he was working both sides. Over the next 3 months, Natalia and Etienne played the most dangerous game in Europe, pretending not to recognize one another while leaving clues behind like breadcrumbs. A misplaced comma in a book title, a rearranged display of volumes, a pause too long when asking for Voltaire. She couldn't be sure if he was still with the resistance, or now a double agent in the Gestapo's pocket. But then one night, he slipped her a package wrapped in newsprint. Inside was a single photo, blurry, shot from a rooftop, and a typed note: "The Reichsminister will be in Paris. Hotel Lutetia, August 4th. Midnight. Basement conference room." The man in the photo was Heinrich Himmler. Natalia's hands trembled. This was the opportunity the resistance had dreamed of, an unguarded window to strike at the heart of the Nazi war machine. But it was also a trap. There had been false leads before, carefully baited by the Abwehr to flush out agents. She included the photo and the note in the ledger, lacing the page with a warning: "If I die, this is why." She contacted her British handler through a coded transmission hidden in a crossword puzzle published in Le Figaro. Within days, instructions came: verify, then eliminate. On August 4th, under the pretense of delivering banned literature to a hotel clerk, Natalia entered the Hotel Lutetia just before midnight. She wore a maid's uniform and carried a forged Vichy service badge. A floor plan had been drawn in the ledger days before. She followed it. But Himmler wasn't there. The room was empty, except for Etienne. He stood alone, not in a uniform, but in civilian clothes, drenched from the rain. He held no weapon, just his voice. "I needed to know if you'd trust me," he said. "Now I know you shouldn't." Before she could respond, sirens screamed outside. German trucks flooded the street. It had been a test, and someone had failed. Etienne shoved a key into her hand. "Back room of your shop. Beneath the stove. Burn it all. They know about the ledger." She made it back to Rue de Martyrs before dawn, weaving through alleys like a ghost. She burned half the ledger in her stove that morning. Not the whole thing, she couldn't. Too much had been sacrificed. Too many names that needed to be remembered. Natalia vanished that day. Her shop was ransacked hours later. The Gestapo found nothing. What they didn't know, she had hidden the second half of the ledger inside the walls of a burned-out tenement across the Seine. Encased in wax, buried behind brick, forgotten. She resurfaced in Belgium in 1945 under yet another identity, feeding Allied intelligence the names of French collaborators in exchange for immunity. Her work had saved hundreds, possibly more. The ledger was never found. Until 1981, when renovations in an old Paris building revealed a dusty container filled with brittle pages, strange symbols, and faded ink that reappeared under heat. The documents were authenticated and sealed in the French National Archives. To this day, many of the names remain redacted. Scholars call it the Widow's Ledger. Historians say it reshaped the understanding of underground espionage in occupied France. But to those who lived through it, it was more than history. It was a reckoning. And behind it all was a woman whose real name, real face, and real fate remain as shadowed as the streets she walked. Proof that the greatest weapon in war is often the one that never fires a bullet. They searched for her, but she was already gone, swallowed by smoke, shadows, and silence. The ledger survived, hidden where no light could reach, ink soaked with names and guilt. Some truths were meant to burn. Others were meant to wait. And now that the pages have resurfaced, we must ask, who writes history, and who erases it?